So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce to you Dr. Bryce Reeve. He comes to us with an unbelievable reputation, and we're really lucky that he's working with us in the field of Angelman syndrome. He's going to be talking to you today about assessing the communication ability in children with Angelman syndrome in order to evaluate treatment benefit for human clinical trials. Just to give you a little bio on him, it's in your folder, but he is the professor of population health sciences and pediatrics at Duke University. He's the director of the Center of Health Measurement, and he's trained in psychometric methods. He focuses on the impact of diseases and treatments and how that affects the lives of patients and caregivers. And so he's working really hard with his team and fast in order to develop a clinical outcome assessment for the measurement of communication in our children before and after treatments on Angelman syndrome. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start off with a huge thanks to Paula Evans and to Allison Berend for inviting me to be here, but most importantly, thank you all for giving me the time to stand up here today to talk about the work that Christina Ziegler, who's in the audience, and I are doing, which is funded through the FAST organization to develop a parent-reported measure of their child's communication ability. And I was trying to think when I looked at the agenda a week or two ago, and I said, I'm following a conversation about rats. Now, how can I completely change your orientation to think about talking about what we actually is most meaningful and important to what you all want to see in terms of improvement in your children's lives. So what I thought would be helpful is I can give you sort of a general overview of the work that myself, Christy Ziegler, and I are doing within our particular lab. So in broad sense, the work that we do is looking at the impact of a disease, condition, or disorder, something like Angelman syndrome, and the treatments for the conditions, and how these impact the lives of the children or the individuals with the condition. In addition, we recognize that not only is that child impacted, we also recognize that the caregivers, the whole family unit, is also impacted in terms of their care for the child themselves. And so, while many laboratory scientists are looking at cells and molecular changes, we look at the more holistic aspects in terms of impact on the children and the caregivers in terms of how they might, their quality of life in terms of how they might be doing physically, mentally, socially, and other aspects of quality of life. This is an important aspect because we recognize that we need to find out better ways to make sure that while we're moving therapies forward there, we need to make sure that these are meaningful to changes in the child and to the caregivers themselves. I work in a lot of different diseases and conditions and settings overall, and there's some cross-cutting themes to the work that we do within our labs. Obviously, we work across a range of chronic conditions, from brittle bone disease to cancer to rheumatic diseases and others. In addition, some other cross-cutting themes as a part of our work, we look at the lifespan. We're interested and we work with children and pediatrics all the way to geriatrics. We're interested in how the environment might impact the patients' and families' quality of life, those who have quick access to medical resources versus those that don't. In addition, one of the things that keeps me up at night is how we can make sure that the systems we create help improve not just the affluent, but those that are in under-resourced populations. So this is the space that myself, Christy Ziegler, and I work in, and we're very interested in how we get involved in helping you all in terms of Angelman syndrome move your therapeutics forward. Now, again, we look at such quality of life issues as physical things like pain, mental things like depression, anxiety, social things like peer relationships or family relationships. These are things that are not measured by devices or monitors. These are things where we use questionnaires or surveys to help us understand how the child or family is doing physically, mentally, and socially. And so that's how we got involved through the working with the FAST organization, where this is a slide that you saw similar to what Allison had presented earlier this morning that showed their tremendous progress as we're moving from preclinical models in rats to start the trials, phase 1 to phase 3 trials in humans. And again, our goal is to make sure that when these are very exciting therapeutics are going to trial there, that we have really good measures, both in terms of the safety of these particular therapeutics, but also in terms of treatment benefit. And so in the past 10 years, there's been a revolutionary change, which is an important change, and I should actually probably say the past 2 decades there, to make sure that these outcomes we're using to evaluate treatment benefit are important to the key stakeholders, and that is patients and their caregivers. And so what has been an exciting area that has been led by the FDA is what's called patient-focused drug development. And what this means in clinical trials is that patients themselves aren't simply subjects in a trial there, but involving patients and key stakeholders like you all, the parents there, to be a part of the research drug development program, which again means you're not just simply participants, but you're helping to drive the science. You're identifying what are the most important questions we should be addressing and what are the most important outcomes that we should be measuring to evaluate treatment benefit. And as the second bullet says there, is patients and caregivers, you all the parents, are uniquely positioned to inform the understanding of the therapeutic context for drug development and evaluation. And so, as part of the work that FAST and many organizations have done to lead this particular area in patient-focused drug development is reaching out to you all to find out what is most important in terms of what you want to see in terms of treatment benefit. And so this is a slide that Allison presented earlier but skipped over really quickly. They did a quick survey among 332 caregivers through their Facebook page, and what they found is one of the #1 outcomes of most importance that they want to see improvements in their children is in the area of speech and communication. So now that we have identified that this and seizures and mobility are also important outcomes overall, what we need to make sure when we start our trials there is that we have good, qualified, rigorous measures that can make sure that we can see changes in each of these different types of parent-reported outcomes. And so as the work that we're starting to do to help us develop a parent-reported parent-reported measure of communication ability, obviously our first question is there already a good measure out there that we can use in these clinical trials? Why reinvent the wheel when there might be something we can use that exists out there? Well, we have done a review of the literature looking at all the other different types of communication measures out there, and there are several good quality measures out there. What we did find through our research is that there were some limitations, and each of the measures at least had a limitation on one of the following 5 different aspects. The first one being is there are principles or laws or properties for which we design questionnaires to make sure they can capture a valid parent assessment of their child's communication ability. And this is part of writing very clear, specific, simple type of questions that can help tap into what their child's communication ability is. The second aspect we found is that there hasn't been sufficient psychometric evidence of its validity and reliability of these measures in individuals with Angelman syndrome. The third aspect, what we found, is that many of the communication measures out there are unable to differentiate where the child's current level of communication is. And what we call that, it has what we call a large floor effect, which means that you might have children that do have a diverse range of their communication ability, but because the measure is not sensitive enough, it gives them all the exact same score, maybe 0 at the floor itself. And if you can't differentiate, if you can't give a number to each individual child where they're starting from, then there's no way you can evaluate whether they're improving over time. And so that's a huge aspect for which we're concerned about. The fourth aspect is there's a lot of good measures out there that are used for clinical practice to help identify what's the best tailored communication therapy we can give for a child, but they're not derived based for use in clinical trials, which has its own unique aspects in terms of characteristics for what is a qualified measure for FDA. And then finally, What we also want to make sure is a key property of what we're developing here today, and this is why I'm talking to you, is we want to make sure that you all, the parents, are involved to help us create these measures, that this is something that is meaningful, important for you all. And with a recognition that now there is a limitation for the existing measures there, where our work is, funded through the FAST, is to develop a new measure of communication ability for children with Angelman syndrome. And so what I'm going to do is walk you through the key steps we do and what we're going to be doing over the subsequent year. And again, what this will highlight is how you all can help us develop this particular measure. The first step we have to do is figure out is, what is this concept we're measuring? And so as I described before, and what's highlighted in blue on the screen here, is what we're developing a measure of communication ability. And this measure, what we propose to do is include both the expressive types of communication your child might have, the receptive types of communication, and the pragmatic types of communication. Pragmatic is like a social type of communication. It's important that our measure captured all these things because we want to make sure that children we know have heterogeneous sort of displays of communication. Some children have stronger receptive than expressive. Children of Angelman have great pragmatic or social communication. We want to make sure our measure captured all these things to see if we can measure change over time in response to the therapeutics. In addition, we recognize that children with Angelman syndrome use different type of ways to communicate. Some might do vocalizations, but some children don't use vocalizations. They might use gestures. They might track with their eyes. They might move their body parts. So we want to make sure our measure performs well regardless of the type of or ways that your child might try to communicate with you and others in the family or with others in the field. The next thing, and this is again where we're going to reach out to you all, is we think we understand what we're measuring, but we want to make sure and hear your feedback because you all are the experts in the field. So what we're planning to do is in-depth individual interviews with experts in the field. That includes you all, the parents, as well as includes clinicians and speech-language pathologists. And they're going to help make sure and inform our understanding of the types of communication ability children with Angelman syndrome are able to communicate. And so the types of questions that we might ask in our interviews to parents there is, on a typical day, what kinds of things does your child communicate about? In addition, we might ask such questions like, what would a meaningful change in communication look like for your child? So these are two of a large number of questions we're going to ask and get your feedback on. We have trained interviewers that will listen to your answers and probe to find out much more about how your child is able to communicate in different types of ways. For example, with the first question there, an interviewer might probe back and say, well, can you tell me about circumstances where your child is more communicative? Can you tell me about circumstances where your child is less communicative? Again, it would be a back and forth conversation. Again, this is an opportunity for you all, the experts, to tell us what we should be measuring. Once we have a good understanding of what communication ability represents, the next step in our phase is we're going to write questions. We'll have good psychometric properties. They're very clear, and we hope represent those things that you all talk to us about. And so these questions might be questions about both expressive type of communications, receptive type of communications, and pragmatic types of communications. Our next step is we're going to come back to you all, the parents. And again, we're going to do another round of individual interviews. And what we're going to do with you all is we're going to have you go through each question and tell us which questions work well and which questions don't work well. And what we might find through this, what we call cognitive interviewing phase, is we might find like questions 1, 2, and 4 work really well. Question 3 just did horrible. No one understood exactly what we're asking, so we'll wipe that out. For questions 5 and 6, we might modify those and change those and retest those again. And then we might add some questions 7 and 8 to these things. Once we've gone through this qualitative phase, our next phase is what we call the quantitative phase. So now we're moving to a small set of in-depth interviews to a much more larger testing among a larger number of parents who can. So this is, again, another opportunity. We're going to reach out to you, and you might get a link to help us answer questions about your child on our new communication matrix and maybe some other type of measures that help us inform and understand how this measure is performing. And then once we collect this data from you all, our next phase is, this is the thing that gets nerdy people, psychometricians like me excited. Ooh, I have numbers and statistics. And what I'm going to do is look at how these questions relate to each other and capture communication ability. And what we'll be looking at through our analyses there is the validity of the measure. To what extent does our set of questions capture this domain of communication ability in a valid way? Reliability, to what extent does our measure have minimal measurement error or noise? How can we get reproducible data over time? Along the same way, we recognize that not everyone in the world speaks English. And so what we're going to be trying to do is develop our questions and translate these for use in other nationalities and countries throughout the world as well. So we can have a multinational program to evaluate and measure communication ability in children with Angelman syndrome. So that leads me to the last part of our slide there, which is, again, a reach out to you, is our work can't move forward without your participation. So I want to reach out to you and thank you for your time and participation, because you will be hearing communications from us. And through the work that you and us working together can do is create much more valid, reliable measures that can be used to help identify those treatments and how those treatments can impact your children's lives and your own quality of life. And so with that, I want to thank you all for your time today. I also want to thank members of our research staff at Duke University. You can see your names listed there, as well as to representatives from the FAST organization who's helped us as part of this progress there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions for Dr. Reeve? So look out for emails and social media contacts. We're going to be recruiting people to, on a random basis, to volunteer to start out with these questionnaires. So that'll be coming very, very soon. So please participate. Thank you so much.